I'm John Foy. Right now I'm Vice President of Bainbridge Island Rowing, and I've been associated with the club since its inception almost in 2001.
My name is Rebecca Slatterly. So my husband was Bill Richards, who was one of the founders of the Bainbridge Club, as we're saying, and he started rowing at Fordham University when he was in college, and then kept it up off and on throughout his adult life.
Bill has quite a history of rowing himself, but even more important, in my opinion, bringing rowing to other people or bringing them to it, both by organizing things, but he was a great cheerleader and very effective at getting people to come down and try it out.
Some might say a body snatcher. Like, you just could not have a tall, fit-looking person go by that Bill wouldn't somehow sidle up and steer the conversation toward, have you ever thought about rowing?
Yeah.
And really, like, amazingly convincing.
The people who were just organizing Bainbridge Island Rowing at the farmers market where Rebecca was in August of 2001. And someone had a shell there, and a small group of people, and another shell at the pavilion, and they were trying to get people interested in rowing. And so I said, I know what that is, and so I started with them and have been with it since then. Something that we should mention is that Bill was quite a writer. He was a journalist, maybe among other things, but and quite well known, I think, and in some ways prominent, at least within the journalism profession, and worked for important newspapers like the Wall Street Journal and writing feature front page articles for them. So, and then he did a stint as a writer on behalf of or engaged by the Seattle Times at the time that that newspaper was ending its joint operating agreement with the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was the crosstown rival. But he wrote great stories and was a very articulate person, could express himself very well and could engage with people very well. So, I mean, that's certainly a prominent aspect of Bill's personality that I remember, and I miss that a lot, I have to say.
He came to be seen in his later life as somewhat of an ethicist. After that gig with the Seattle Times, he was offered and accepted a couple of other similar kinds of positions, being an arbiter, a neutral party in the journalism world. So as somebody who perhaps was a more hot-headed younger man, from what I understand, he definitely in his later life, when we knew him, came to be sort of a wise, grounded elder that a lot of people, I think, looked up to and admired. And yeah.
Should we mention any stories of Bill from that college era as he has told them?
I knew that was going to come into this interview somehow. Well, maybe I think if we're thinking of the same story before we ever knew Bill, he would tell a story that he didn't get to finish out maybe on the varsity crew at Fordham because he was asked to leave Fordham before the end of his time, as he says, because he was mooning a nun, which was seen as inappropriate behavior.
I thought it was a school official, but maybe it's the same person anyway. It got him in trouble. Not entirely hard to believe, knowing Bill, as you know, picturing how he might have been then. You know, Bill was probably the prime mover in getting himself, me, Russ McComb, and Dave Ward involved in that Head of the Charles regatta, which was a very sort of serendipitous event. As the article that you have in front of you, Chapel, says, well, what's it called? Something about ignorance?
Ignorance in action.
Ignorance in action. How well titled. Because Bill thought we ought to take a shot at getting an entry in this very prestigious regatta in 2003. So Bainbridge Island Rowing had only existed 2 years at that point, and none of us were very good at it. Bill was probably the best rower of the four of us because he had rowed extensively in college, and after that the rest of us were rookies at it, basically. But he put an application in, and somehow we got selected to row a 4. We ended up staying with Bill's brother, who lived in Connecticut, and borrowing a boat from his brother's boat club and taking it up to Boston on the top of a pickup truck. And we ended up getting the boat to the Charles and rowing in that event. And we didn't do well by the usual standards, but by our own goals, we were sort of okay, because we had endeavored to be able to finish and not be last and have a good time at it, and we hit all those. We were 14th out of 15, 2003.
And that was the first Bainbridge boat ever to go to Head of the Charles.
It was, and so in that sense it was a little bit of groundbreaking. We've had several boats with a lot more capability participate in Head of the Charles since then, both women and men. And we have the women were successful enough last year that they have an automatic entry this year, and we may have a men's boat as well.
Another story from that trip was, so as John said, Bill's brother, Rob Richards, has always been a rower too. And I think you guys borrowed a coxswain from that team.
We did.
Who was an elderly
79-year-old grandmother, about 4.5 feet tall maybe, and the story was that she'd had an opportunity to do it the prior year, 2002, and sort of chickened out, and then was mad at herself for having done that. So she said, next time I get the opportunity, I'm going to do it. And so Rob asked her if she would cox for us for 2003, and so she stepped up and did it, and apparently studied the course and did all the things that a coxswain is supposed to do, and she did fine. It's a fairly tricky course at times, though we were not ever directly neck and neck with somebody, which is the most challenging situation for our cox. But nonetheless, she was fine, and we all had a great time, and so did she. And one sort of fun aspect of that is I think there's 7 bridges that you go under on the Charles as you run this course, and on at least several of them we could hear people up on the bridge yelling, "Go Grandma!" So her family was there.
They loved telling that story when they came back from that trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really a lifelong dream of Bill's to do the Head of the Charles. He had never done it, and was so excited when you got, but I don't think any of us really believed that you guys were truly going to go. I mean, first when he applied, nobody thought they would get accepted, and then when they did, I mean, really, you guys were pretty green at the whole thing, and I didn't really think it was going to happen.
That's putting it politely. Yeah, we were quite surprised to get in, and the other 3 of us didn't really know what it was. Bill knew what it was and what the implications were. It's a fairly high-end rowing event, and maybe the largest in the country, and draws something like 1,500 boats, I think, and several times that many people. It's a large event. And so it was kind of a big deal, but we were relatively oblivious to most of that prior.
Well, another legacy that I feel is important to mention is even though Bill's passion was mostly adult masters rowing, he did really help to get a fire lit under the juniors program, which just immediately was a huge, just groundswell of interest. And I mean, an incredible legacy is a bunch of kids have gone to college on these rowing scholarships because this club got started. And definitely in Indianola, it was just a really scrappy, very ragtag kind of, a lot of just duct tape and super glue making things work. And a bunch of kids who really maybe wouldn't have gone to college, or definitely wouldn't have gotten into such great colleges, had their start because Bill's enthusiasm for rowing was really infectious. Mm-hmm. And he just, as we're saying, wanted to bring the sport into people's lives. And as time went on, Bill didn't even really row that much. He coached, he taught the workout classes and organized the learn to row classes, and did pretty much a full-time week. It is not exaggerating, as John could tell you, because he's been doing it since, but it could be 30, 40 hours a week that he would spend, coordinating all the different port side, starboard side, men, women, backups, people who couldn't come, people who couldn't cox, who would cox, the backup coxswains, the backup of the backup coxswain, like just, I mean, whatever, endless tidal changes and rain change. It was incredible how much time he put into it, like really incredible. But, you know, it drew a lot of people, and he was able to keep these clubs going. And because he, like I said, he, after a while, didn't even row that much anymore, but spent all this time keeping other people on the water. And even when it was his turn to row, he would always be the graceful gentleman who would back out and let the fifth extra person who did show up do it. And anyway, that was really his spirit.
That's quite true. And Bill even coxed himself, which was kind of an interesting thing because he was a fairly big guy. And the cox seats, coxswain is the person who sits in usually the back, in Bill's case, the stern of the boat, and steers. There are now some boats, many in fact the fours, that have the coxswain up front, but Bill would never have fit into that slot. It's way too skinny. But anyway, it was kind of interesting to see Bill. He would actually perch up on the gunnels, put a block under him or something, because he couldn't really fit down into the spot. And then it was kind of humorous for those of us rowing and Bill was a participant in this sort of humorous thing about us hauling him around in the harbor as he was the cox. But it allowed people to take a boat out who otherwise wouldn't have if you didn't have a cox. And he was really a good coach from the cox seat. So he would often combine coxing a boat but with coaching, giving you lessons right on the water, watching your stroke, which is the cox is particularly in a good position to see the blade work. And so Bill was quite sharp at that and able to tell people what to do. He was a good coach.
It was interesting he was a good coach because he never had any training as a coach, or I don't think it's anything he had ever thought about. But I used to participate in a winter workout class that rowing, erg class that he did. And he was a really good coach and people really liked him. And I don't know, it was kind of neat that he just had that ability and stepped up to it.
I'm glad to hear you talk about his support for the junior program in general, and especially in Indianola and Kitsap rowing, because he sometimes got a little bit of what I would think is mostly a bum rap for a little conflict here and there with the juniors program. He was such a strong advocate for the masters, the adult rowers, that sometimes caused some frictions here and there. And particularly with the junior program, it seems to be sort of a truism that the junior parents can get very intense about their child's participation and performance and every other aspect of the kids participating in the program, and sometimes that causes opportunities for conflict, shall we say. But Bill was quite diplomatic most of the time and able to handle those things. And I say this having been a junior parent myself. My daughter rowed in the program when she was when she was in Bainbridge High School, so I kind of see that perspective. But it was kind of fun at times. There were a few times when I was trying to help Bill understand the parental perspective on these things. But it's essentially a high school sport. It's usually around 100 kids, roughly evenly divided between boys and girls. And that makes it either the largest or the second largest sport at Bainbridge High most years, I think. Although it's not an official school sport, it is recognized by the school, and the kids can earn a varsity letter, but there's no support, no financial support from the school district, unlike, say, football or something. And so, in fact, it's that way with rowing all around. It's entirely supported by the participants or their parents in the case of the kids. And we have almost as many adult rowers most years. That too fluctuates with the year. And one of the things that is good about that is getting off of Bill a little bit, but this, what's sometimes called the intergenerational aspect of the sport, as well as the, what would you call it, intergender aspect, is kind of a fun thing that people like. I think in various age groups and in the Masters group, our oldest rower is probably 83. I think maybe she's 84, and we have a guy who's 82. And then we have a number of people who are in their 70s. So this age range from 14 to 83 or something is kind of unusual for most sports. And the boys and the girls in the program, I've found it quite remarkable how well they support each other and they cheer each other on. So there isn't a lot of separation. There isn't much in the way of snarky comments and so on by the boys toward the girls or vice versa. It seems to be different than I remember how it was oftentimes in high school. And between the kids and the adults, there are certain regattas during the year that they participate in jointly. So there'll be masters boats and juniors boats, and it's the same story there. They will carry each other's oars. They will help each other get the boats launched, pick up the shoes, cheer for the other group. And I don't mean to overplay this. I mean, the kids mostly go their way and the adults mostly go their way, but it's not nearly the kind of divide you might think. It's it functions in some ways like more of an organization, and I like that. I think that's pretty sweet.
Well, so here's what I have to say. May we all be so lucky as to leave this life doing the thing that we really love and are really passionate about, and to die really quickly doing what we really love. Isn't that ultimately what each of us would want? We were lucky in our family that that's what we had. So 4.5 years ago, Bill left to go and learn the winter workout class in Paulsbo at a little rental space that they had. There was like maybe 5 ergs there or something, and it was twice a week. And I said something like, "Oh, it's just gonna be leftovers for dinner, but see you when you get back." And anyway, he went to lead this winter workout class and was working out on one of the ergs prior to the class, before the students got there, and had a heart attack while he was doing it. And the first rower came and found him and tried to do CPR on him and called the 911 and stuff. And then the others came, and the other students and rowers. Anyway, so they tried to bring him back, but they couldn't. But anyway, he died really with a beautiful expression on his face, and I think it was really the best death that it could be. And he's left a lot of really great things for a lot of people. Me, and for sure the rowing community here, hugely.
After that occurred in January 2014, I think. The following summer, we decided to have a regatta in honor of Bill. And so that was a lot of fun and very successful, and so it's been repeated every year since then and rotates among the 3 clubs. So the first one was at Bainbridge. The next year it was held at Kitsap Rowing, which is on Liberty Bay in Paulsbo, and the third year was at Clam Island in Silverdale. That year we actually didn't get on the water because it was gale force winds practically, and wasn't safe to go out. But that was the first year that the juniors crew from South Kitsap showed up, and we, those of us from Paulsbo and Bainbridge, didn't really know what to expect, and suddenly there were 20 kids there and 3 coaches, I think, very enthusiastic. And so when all the clubs got under a picnic pavilion to stay out of the rain, and started giving sort of little impromptu reports on how their clubs were doing, the South Kitsap people were very enthusiastic and I would say very well received by the other clubs. So it was really a stimulus for awareness of the clubs of each other, and the building of some more communication links that have continued, I think. And partly as a result of that awareness, Bainbridge Island Rowing was able to had helped Clam Island with loan and donation of equipment, and then ended up doing the same with South Kitsap to help them get started with shells and oars and things of that sort. So now this year, being the 4th year, it's Bainbridge's turn again to host the what's called the Bill Richards Memorial Regatta.
And there's a crazy trophy that goes with it.
Yes.
That Russ made up that has, what does it have? It has like the top of a boat.
It has the bow part of a shell that broke off in some accident, and we said, Bill would like that. It's mounted on a little piece of wood, so you have this sort of odd-shaped piece of almost driftwood. It's not quite, but it's sort of not anything very polished. And sticking out of it is the prow of a shell, which is it's a fiberglass thing. And it's kind of an odd trophy, but everybody sort of thinks it's probably appropriate.
Yeah, it was even though they didn't get out on the water, it was a really successful event.
It was.
It was a lot of people and a lot of community and delicious food in the pouring, pouring rain under this picnic shelter. And there was a lot about that event that was successful.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think it was largely Bill's brainchild, this now rowing building, this house down there, that he had it in his mind from, in part from his brother Rob in Connecticut, they have some fancy rowing houses there. And he really got the idea that down there in Waterfront Park that there should be this, and maybe as funding that there should be a restaurant as part of it that would maybe pay rent and, you know, would help to make the whole thing happen. And it was really pretty controversial at the beginning because that really is city land, and this is kind of a private club that not everybody benefits from in the same way as like a band shell or, you know, picnic shelter or something. But he really thought it was a good idea and started researching other ones around the country and how they had gotten their funding and how they'd worked with cities and public-private partnership. And he started to shake the trees and, I don't know, start going to meetings and putting the word out. And it was really a nascent thing and seemed like such a long shot at the time.
Indeed. There was a question of where would it sit? Where could we have it there? And I remember talking to Bill about this and saying, what we really ought to do is excavate that tennis court and drop it down, because it's way up on top of a hill, and it was kind of a challenge to carry the boats up and down that hill. And Bill said, that's a great idea, but it'll never happen. It would be too expensive, and nobody would let us do that, you know. And so I think he would be pleased to see what has actually happened now, because for reasons that are not entirely clear, that's actually how it worked out. And people think it's okay. And I still to this day am not quite sure what made it feasible, but it turned out to be kind of a big step in exactly the direction I think he was hoping.
One other thing I wanted to mention too, and I don't really know how exactly this has played out on Bainbridge, but I know that in the founding of the Indianola Club, as I've alluded to, it was a very kind of a scrappy club. That is how they were self-described. And from Bill's background on the East Coast, and historically, that rowing has been kind of a elite, expensive sport, and he really didn't want it to be that. I mean, partly like we're saying, he was just trying to recruit anybody and everybody because he was so passionate about this sport. And part of anybody and everybody is that not everybody, you know, has the extra income to be able to participate. So I know with the Indianola Club for sure, he just from the very beginning wanted it to be open to everybody. And so if it meant a lot of old equipment and borrowed things, and Bainbridge was so generous in helping the Indianola Club get started and lending things and just used stuff and trading stuff and, you know, just doing fundraisers like crazy and having fun and building community by doing these fundraisers. But anyway, that is something that really lives on up there, is just, like I've said, with the juniors, just wanting everybody to have a chance to do it. And if you couldn't pay the annual dues, just figuring out ways. There's other people in the club that have stepped in and been anonymous funders so that new people have been able to join who wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that's a really cool part of the spirit that he brought at least to that club, and maybe is here too.
And also with Bainbridge Island Rowing, that's the same tradition. I think probably in part due to Bill's attitude about it, which are called scholarships. And every year, the Bainbridge Club has been able to provide scholarships due to generous donors and some foundation grants to help support that. And that is available not only to the high school kids, which is a big help for some families, particularly if they have multiple kids, but also to the adult rowers, which is, I think, less common, but it's been part of the story with Bainbridge, and that is very helpful in some cases for the reasons you say. It's kind of intrinsically a bit expensive, and so I think we've never had the case of somebody who wanted to row and couldn't for financial reasons. That's a good, strong tradition that we hope to be able to continue.
B.L. Swanson.
B.L. Swanson, that was it.
So, do you like this one as well?
And then this is the publication of a local maritime organization called the Puget Sound Maritime Group, I think, and this is their journal called The Sea Chest that comes out.
My name is Chapel Langmack. I'm a relatively new rower, and the more involved I became in the club, the more I was aware that we weren't recording our history very well, and I think we have a really fascinating history. So I volunteered to start putting pieces of the puzzle together, and this conversation between John and Rebecca about Bill Richards is one of those pieces, because I understand that Bill was a very influential guy in the rowing community at large, and something that we need to be aware of and continue on with. As I track down folks who were initially involved and who have been involved along the way, are hoping to record their stories as well. We can take it for granted. I mean, I march down to the boathouse 3 times a week and haul out a boat and go rowing, and there's a reason that I can do that. And I think it's nice not to, to know that there was a lot of effort that went into that to allow me to be able to do that.